The Altarian Empire ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. Their massive ships crossed space like moving cities. Their soldiers wore armor that could stop laser fire, and their weapons could melt steel. For 300 years they had conquered world after world. No one could stand against them. But in the dark corners of military bases across the Empire, tough soldiers told stories that made their hands shake. They whispered about her in the mess halls when the officers were not listening. They talked about her during guard duty when the nights grew long and quiet. Always in hushed voices, always looking over their shoulders. Her name was Hyunwoo Kim. The humans called her the Shadow Walker. The Empire said she was dead, killed 15 years ago during the war for Earth Colony 7. Her death was recorded in official files. Her body was supposed to be buried on some forgotten battlefield, but the stories would not die. Sergeant Dalsu Park remembered the first time he heard about her. He was a young recruit then, fresh from training on the Empire homeworld. An old veteran named Taeho pulled him aside after a briefing. "Listen, boy," Taeho had whispered. "If you ever get stationed on a human world, you be extra careful at night. She might be dead on paper, but dead things still walk in the dark." Dalsu had laughed. "Come on, one human woman against the whole Empire?" The old soldier did not laugh back. 3 months ago I was stationed on Kepler Prime. Whole battalion of our best troops. We had sensors everywhere, guards on every corner. Nothing could move without us knowing. Taeho paused and looked around to make sure no officers were near. We woke up one morning and found Lieutenant Commander Sang-min dead in his locked quarters. Door was sealed from the inside. No windows, no air vents big enough for a mouse. But there he was, dead as stone. And you know what we found written on his wall? Dalsu shook his head. "Remember the children," written in his own blood. Security cameras showed nothing. Motion sensors detected nothing. But somehow she got in, killed him, and got out like she was never there. Now Dalsu was no longer a young recruit. He had fought on 12 worlds and seen things that would give normal people nightmares. But he still remembered that story. Still felt a chill when he walked empty corridors at night. The stories were everywhere. Colonel Minho told about a supply convoy that disappeared between 2 checkpoints. 30 vehicles carrying weapons and food. 100 soldiers providing security. The route was only 50 kilometers through open desert. No place to hide, they found the convoy 6 hours later. All 30 vehicles were parked in perfect formation at the destination checkpoint. The cargo was untouched. But every single soldier was gone. Just vanished. No bodies, no blood. No signs of struggle. The only clue was a message painted on the side of the lead truck. "These supplies will feed human children. Thank you for your donation." Commander Junsik had an even stranger story. His base on Titan Colony had the best security in the sector. Energy shields that could stop artillery shells. Automated defense towers that tracked everything larger than a bird. Underground bunkers built to survive nuclear attacks. One night, every system in the base went crazy for exactly 10 seconds. Alarms screamed. Lights flashed. Sensors reported intruders everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Then everything went back to normal. When they checked the command center, they found that someone had accessed their main computer during those 10 seconds, downloaded every file about human prisoner locations, changed the duty rosters for the next week, and left a simple message on the commander's personal screen. "Your prisoners are being moved to safety. Try to stop me." The next morning, they discovered that the transport schedules had been changed. Instead of moving human prisoners to labor camps, the ships were taking them to neutral systems where they could find freedom. By the time Command realized what happened, 3,000 humans had escaped. These stories spread through the Empire military like wildfire. Each telling added new details. Each retelling made her seem more dangerous, more impossible. Some said she could walk through walls. Others claimed she could control machines with her mind. A few insisted she could become invisible at will. The smart ones said it did not matter how she did it. What mattered was that she was out there, watching, waiting. The Empire commanders tried to stop the stories. They issued orders against spreading rumors. They punished soldiers caught talking about ghost sightings. They brought in scientists to explain how the incidents were just equipment failures and coincidences. Nothing worked. The legend of Hyunwoo Kim grew stronger with each passing year. General Yuljin Ross commanded the garrison on Kepler's Edge. He was a practical man who believed in facts and evidence. When his aide, Captain Bo Young, mentioned the Shadow Walker stories, he just laughed. "Captain, we are the Altarian Empire. We have conquered hundreds of worlds. Our technology is beyond anything these primitive humans can understand. You really think one woman with basic weapons is running around killing our soldiers? Sir, the reports are very detailed. Multiple witnesses. Similar methods across different worlds. The reports are fear and imagination. Soldiers see what they expect to see. They hear stories and suddenly every equipment malfunction becomes a ghost attack. General Ross pulled up the official files on his computer screen. Look here. Commander Hyunwoo Kim, Human Colonial Defense Force, age 32 at time of death, killed during the siege of Research Station Alpha on Colony 7. Body recovered and processed according to standard procedures. He turned the screen toward his aide. Dead people do not run around the galaxy playing tricks on Imperial soldiers. What we have here is a series of unrelated incidents being connected by superstitious minds. Captain Bo-young nodded but did not look convinced. What about the message signatures, sir? Every incident includes references to her name or unit designation. Easy to fake. Any rebel group could use her identity to make their attacks seem more threatening. Dead heroes make good propaganda tools. The general closed the files and stood up. Captain, I want you to send a message to all unit commanders in this sector. Any soldier caught spreading these ghost stories will face disciplinary action. We are the Altarian Empire. We do not fear shadows and fairy tales. But even as he gave those orders, General Ross felt a small, uncomfortable thought in the back of his mind. 15 years was a long time. Long enough for someone to plan. Long enough to prepare. Long enough to become something more dangerous than the person they used to be. He pushed the thought away and went back to his paperwork. 3 days later, Admiral Korvac received a routine intelligence report about possible rebel activity near settlement. Omega-7. The report suggested that human families in the settlement might be hiding weapons or supporting resistance operations. The Admiral barely read the details. He had dealt with dozens of similar reports. The solution was always the same: quick, clean, efficient. He authorized immediate orbital bombardment. Settlement Omega-7 was destroyed in 17 minutes. 300 civilians died. 47 of them were children under the age of 10. Among the dead were Jin A. Park, age 8, and her little brother Tai Min, age 5. Their mother Su Jin had been a captain in the Human Defense Forces before the Empire conquered their world. She had died trying to shield her children from the falling fire. What Admiral Korvac did not know was that Su Jin Park had a sister, an older sister who had served in the human military alongside her. An older sister who the Empire thought they had killed 15 years ago. An older sister who had spent those 15 years learning how to move like smoke through the Empire's defenses, learning how to turn their own technology against them, learning how to become the nightmare that followed Imperial soldiers into their dreams. Hyunwoo Kim received word of the massacre through the underground network she had spent 15 years building. She traveled to Kepler's Edge using false papers and hidden transport routes. She walked through the ruins of what had been her sister's home. In the wreckage, she found a small toy shuttle that had somehow survived the bombardment. It was a gift she had given to little Tai Min on his 5th birthday, just 2 months earlier. She had visited them in secret, wearing a disguise, pretending to be just another refugee. She had watched Jin A help her little brother learn to make the toy shuttle fly around the room. Now they were gone, burned to ash because an Imperial admiral wanted to make an example. Hyunwoo Kim knelt in the ruins and held the broken toy in her hands. For 15 years she had stayed hidden. For 15 years she had been careful not to draw attention. She had told herself that survival was victory enough, that staying alive was a form of resistance. But as she sat surrounded by the glass and ash that had once been her family's home, she realized that survival was no longer enough. The Empire had made 2 mistakes. First, they had assumed she was dead. Now they were about to learn their second mistake. They had given her a reason to stop hiding. The Shadow Walker was about to become real, and the Altarian Empire was about to discover what happened when you killed the wrong children. The Altarian garrison on Kepler's Edge was built like a fortress. 5,000 soldiers lived behind walls that could stop tank shells. 3 orbital defense platforms watched the sky like metal eyes. Deep underground, a command center controlled everything with computers that never slept. General Yuljin Ross walked through the corridors every morning, proud of what the Empire had built. This base was his life's work. Nothing could threaten it. No rebel force had weapons strong enough to break through their defenses. He was wrong. Captain Junho Lee was the first to die. He worked in intelligence, spending long hours reading reports about rebel activities. Lee was the one who had recommended the orbital strike on settlement Omega-7. He said the human families there were probably hiding weapons or helping rebels. 3 days after the settlement burned, Lee worked late in his office. Security cameras showed him entering his private quarters at 11:47 that night. The door locked behind him with a soft beep. 2 guards stood outside in the hallway. Motion sensors watched every corner. At 11:52, Lee's heart stopped beating. The guards heard nothing. The sensors detected nothing. When they found his body the next morning, the medical scanner could not explain what happened. No poison in his blood, no wounds on his skin, no signs that anyone had touched him. Heart attack, the doctor said. Too much stress. These intelligence officers work too hard. General Ross nodded and signed the report. Soldiers died sometimes. Equipment failed. People got sick. It happened, but Captain Lee had been 35 years old and in perfect health. 3 days later, Major Dao Su Chen died in his locked office. Chen ran the logistics department. He decided which ships carried supplies and when they left port. He was the one who had scheduled the bombardment ships that destroyed settlement Omega-7. The office door was sealed from the inside. No windows. No air vents large enough for a person to crawl through. Security guards checked on him every hour by radio. At 2 in the morning, Chen stopped answering their calls. They found him slumped over his desk. The medical examiner said his spinal cord had been severed, but there were no cuts on his body. No wounds at all. Like something had reached inside him and snapped his backbone without breaking his skin. Strange, the doctor muttered. Very strange. I have never seen anything like this. General Ross stood beside the body and frowned. 2 senior officers dead in less than a week. Both had been involved in the settlement Omega-7 operation. Both had died in locked rooms with no signs of forced entry. Double the security patrols, he ordered. Check all the air vents. Scan for hidden passages. Someone is getting into this base. They searched for 3 days. Found nothing. The base was solid rock and steel. No secret tunnels. No hidden doors. No way for an intruder to move around without being seen. Then Lieutenant Commander Bo Young Kim died. The name was unfortunate. Kim was a common family name, but it made everyone think of the ghost stories. Bo Young had been the communications officer who sent the bombardment coordinates to the orbital platforms. She was working the night shift in the communications center. 6 armed guards surrounded her station. Cameras watched from every angle. Motion detectors covered every entrance. At exactly midnight, every electronic device in the facility flickered for less than 1 second. Just a brief moment of static on the screens. A tiny hiccup in the power systems. When the displays cleared, Bo Young was dead at her console. The guards were unconscious but breathing. Later, they said they could not remember anything between 11:59 and 12:01. Most disturbing of all, someone had used Bo Young's access codes during that missing minute. They had sent a message across all Imperial communication channels in the sector. The message was short, spoken by a woman's voice in accented Altarian. You killed children. You will all answer for this. At the bottom was a symbol, a human military badge that belonged to Commander Hyunwoo Kim. Dead for 15 years according to Imperial records. General Ross called Admiral Korvac immediately. Sir, we have a problem. Someone is killing my officers. All of them were involved in the settlement Omega-7 bombardment. What kind of someone, General? I don't know, sir. They move through our security like it doesn't exist. No traces, no evidence. Just dead bodies in locked rooms. There was silence on the communication line. Then Admiral Korvac's voice came back, hard as steel. General, there are no ghosts. Find this terrorist and kill them. I'm sending reinforcements. But Hyunwoo Kim was already moving to her next target. Sergeant Won-Soo Park commanded the security detail that had protected the bombardment ships during the attack. He was a careful man who followed every safety protocol. He never walked anywhere alone. Never entered a room without checking it first. It did not matter. They found him in Admiral Korvac's personal shuttle, apparently dead from explosive decompression. His body showed all the signs of being exposed to vacuum. Eyes burst. Blood boiled. Lungs collapsed. The strange thing was that the shuttle's hull was perfect. No holes, no cracks. The atmosphere processor showed normal pressure throughout the flight. Every system said the shuttle had never lost air. Impossible, the mechanic said. This man died in space, but he never left atmosphere. General Ross stared at the body and felt cold fear creeping up his spine. Whatever was killing his officers had power beyond anything he understood. The psychological effect on the garrison was terrible. Soldiers who had faced alien armies without flinching now jumped at shadows. Officers refused to be alone. Work efficiency dropped as paranoia spread through the ranks like a disease. Sleep became difficult. Every sound in the corridors at night might be her footsteps. Every flicker of the lights might mean she was coming. The guards started sleeping in groups, huddled together like frightened children. Commander Yoon Ji-han arrived from Fleet Headquarters to take over the intelligence department. She was young and confident, sure that her training could solve any problem. She studied the security recordings for hours looking for patterns. "This is just advanced technology," she told General Ross. "Some new rebel weapon we haven't seen before. Probably stolen Empire equipment modified for stealth operations." She implemented new security protocols, biometric scanners on every door, random password changes every hour, guard patrols every 5 minutes instead of every 10. Commander Han lasted 6 days. They found her in her quarters with every bone in her body broken. Not shattered by impact, broken one by one, methodically, like someone had taken time to snap each individual bone. The medical report said the damage was consistent with falling from a great height repeatedly. Her quarters were on the ground floor. No windows. The ceiling was 8 feet high. "How do you fall from a great height in a room with no height to fall from?" the doctor asked. Nobody had an answer. General Ross realized he was dealing with something beyond normal human capabilities. He ordered the most extreme security measures in Imperial military doctrine: motion sensors in every corridor, sensitive enough to detect a mouse, constant biometric monitoring of all personnel, armed patrols every 2 minutes, guards required to check in with Central Command every 30 seconds. The base became a fortress within a fortress. Nothing moved without being tracked. Nothing happened without being recorded. It made no difference. Major Sung Ho Yoon died in the armory, surrounded by enough weapons to fight a war. Every entrance was guarded. Every weapon was locked down. Motion detectors covered every inch of floor space. They found him buried under a pile of ammunition crates that had somehow stacked themselves on top of him. The crates weighed 300 pounds each. The loading mechs that could move them were all locked down and showed no signs of recent use. The security recordings showed the crates moving by themselves, floating through the air like they had no weight, arranging themselves into a perfect pyramid with Major Yoon underneath. Colonel Min-Suk Jang died in the mess hall during lunch hour, surrounded by 200 other soldiers, sitting at a table in the center of the room with clear sight lines in every direction. He was eating soup when his spoon stopped moving halfway to his mouth. He sat perfectly still for 30 seconds. Then he fell forward onto his tray, dead. The autopsy showed that his brain had been scrambled like an egg, but there was no sign of trauma to his skull. Like something had reached inside his head and stirred up his thoughts without leaving a mark. General Ross gathered his remaining officers in the main briefing room. All of them looked tired and scared. These were men who had conquered planets, but now they were afraid to walk down hallways alone. "Recommendations," he said simply. "Evacuate the base," said Major Kim without hesitation. "Whatever this is, we cannot fight it." Quest. "Immediate reinforcement from the capital fleet," suggested Captain Lee. "They'll bring in the best." "Investigators, the Empire has surrender," whispered Lieutenant Park. Everyone stared at him. "I mean, send a message. Ask what it wants. Maybe we can negotiate." General Ross wanted to be angry at such cowardice, but he was too tired, too frightened. He had watched 17 of his best officers die in ways that defied explanation. The thing hunting them was not using weapons they could understand or defend against. Before he could respond, every light in the base went out. Admiral Korvac arrived at Kepler's edge with enough firepower to destroy a planet. 2 battlecruisers hung in orbit like metal moons. A full Marine battalion filled transport ships with 3,000 elite soldiers. Behind them came the most feared man in the Empire. Inquisitor Vex Tarnul stepped off his ship wearing black robes that seemed to drink light. His pale face showed no emotion as he surveyed the frightened garrison. For 20 years he had broken rebel movements across the galaxy. Planets surrendered rather than face his methods. "Show me the bodies," he said to General Ross. They walked through the medical bay where 17 officers lay under white sheets. Null examined each one with cold interest. He read the autopsy reports, studied the security recordings, asked detailed questions about every death. Interesting, he said finally. Very precise work. This person knows human anatomy better than most doctors. They also understand our security systems perfectly. Can you catch them? General Ross asked. I have never failed to find my target, General. This terrorist will be no different. Admiral Korvac wanted fast results. He ordered a complete lockdown of all human civilians on the planet. Every man, woman, and child was taken from their homes and brought to detention camps, surrounded by electric fences and guard towers. If there is a human insurgent hiding among the population, we will find them, he announced. The detention camps held 50,000 people, farmers and shopkeepers, teachers and mechanics, children who cried for their parents, old people who could barely walk. Inquisitor Null began his work. He set up his equipment in the largest camp. Machines that could read thoughts, devices that caused pain without leaving marks, chemical injections that made people tell the truth even when they did not want to. The first group brought to him were the leaders of the human community. Mayor Dongsu Kim, Dr. Sumin, Park, Teacher Hai-Wan Lee. Null strapped them to chairs and attached wires to their heads. Tell me about Commander Hyunwoo Kim, he said. We never heard that name before. Mayor Kim gasped as electricity coursed through his body. She died 15 years ago, Dr. Park whispered through gritted teeth. Please. We are just farmers and workers, Teacher Lee begged. We know nothing about any military person. The mind-reading machines confirmed they were telling the truth. These people had no connection to the mysterious killer hunting Imperial officers. Null moved to the next group. Then the next. Day after day he questioned hundreds of civilians. He used every method the Empire had developed to break human will. Pain that drove people insane, drugs that stripped away all mental defenses, machines that could detect the smallest lie. Every single person gave the same answer. They knew nothing about Commander Hyunwoo Kim. They had never seen her, never helped her, never even heard stories about her. Their terror was real. Their confusion was genuine. These were not rebels or spies. They were ordinary people caught in something beyond their understanding. While Null tortured civilians, the deaths of Imperial officers continued. Sergeant Won-Soo Park had been assigned to Admiral Korvac's personal security team. He was one of the best soldiers in the Empire, trained to detect threats that others might miss. His job was to keep the Admiral safe during inspection tours of the base. They found Park in the Admiral's private shuttle, apparently dead from explosive decompression. His body showed all the signs of being exposed to vacuum, but the shuttle had never lost pressure. Every system reported normal atmosphere throughout the flight. How is this possible? Admiral Korvac demanded. The ship's engineer shook his head. Sir, according to our instruments, this man died in deep space. But he never left the shuttle. The shuttle never left the atmosphere. Commander Yoon Ji-han arrived to replace the dead intelligence officers. She was confident that proper analysis would solve the mystery. She brought new scanning equipment from the capital. Devices that could detect genetic traces days old. Sensors that could track heat signatures through solid walls. Han set up a command center in the most secure part of the base. Triple locked doors. Armed guards every 10 feet. Constant monitoring of all life signs within a 100-meter radius. She lasted 6 days. They found her in her sealed quarters with every bone in her body broken methodically. The damage looked like she had fallen from a great height dozens of times, but her room was on the ground floor with an 8-foot ceiling. The injuries are impossible, the medical officer reported. This woman was thrown around like a rag doll by something with incredible strength. But there are no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds. She did not fight back. Maybe she could not see what was attacking her, suggested Captain Young Siko Admiral. Korvac stared at the broken body and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear, real fear that made his hands shake and his mouth go dry. This was not random terrorism. Someone was hunting Imperial officers with surgical precision. Someone who could move through their best defenses like they did not exist. The psychological effect on his forces was devastating. Soldiers who had conquered alien civilizations now huddled together in groups. Officers refused to be alone even for minutes. Work efficiency dropped to almost nothing as paranoia infected everyone. Sleep became impossible. Every sound in the corridors might be death approaching. Every shadow might hide an invisible killer. Guards jumped at their own reflections. Sentries fired at empty air when sensors gave false alarms. Admiral Korvac implemented the most extreme security measures in Imperial military history. Motion detectors so sensitive they could track dust particles. Biometric scanners that required DNA confirmation every 30 seconds. Armed patrols that moved in overlapping patterns with no gaps. The base became a fortress of paranoia, where nobody trusted anything and everyone watched everyone else. It made no difference. Major Sung Ho. Yoon died in the armory surrounded by enough weapons to fight a war. Every entrance was monitored. Every weapon was locked down with triple security codes. They found him crushed under a pyramid of ammunition crates that weighed 300 pounds each. The loading machines that could move such weight were all powered down and showed no signs of recent use. The security recordings showed the crates floating through the air like they had no weight, stacking themselves into a perfect burial mound with Yoon underneath. The crates moved by themselves, the security chief reported in a shaking voice. They just lifted off the floor and arranged themselves. Like invisible hands were moving them. Colonel Min-suk Jang died during lunch in the mess hall. 200 witnesses, clear sight lines in every direction, surrounded by his fellow officers at a table in the center of the room. He was eating soup when his spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. For 30 seconds he sat perfectly still like a statue. Then he collapsed face first into his food. Dead. The autopsy showed his brain had been destroyed from the inside, scrambled like an egg in its shell, but his skull showed no damage. No sign of trauma or foreign objects. Something reached inside his head and stirred up his thoughts, the doctor whispered. But there are no wounds, no entry points, nothing to explain how this happened. The breaking point came when she decided to visit Admiral Korvac personally. The Admiral was in his secure briefing room aboard his flagship. The room was protected by military-grade energy shields that could stop artillery shells. 12 elite guards surrounded him with weapons drawn. Sensors monitored everything down to the molecular level. The lights went out for exactly 10 seconds. When emergency power restored illumination, the guards found a message burned into the metal table directly in front of Korvac's chair. Settlement Omega-7. 300 innocents. 47 children under age 10. Remember their names. Below the message was a complete list of everyone who had died in the orbital bombardment. Their names. Their ages. What they had been doing when death fell from the sky. A little girl playing with dolls. A boy learning to read. Families eating dinner together for the last time. At the bottom, in smaller text, you have 72 hours to surrender yourselves for trial. After that, I stopped being subtle. Admiral Korvac stared at the burned words and realized with growing horror that everything they had experienced so far had been restrained. She had been holding back her true capabilities. She had walked onto his flagship, moved through shields that could stop tank rounds, past elite guards trained to detect threats invisible to normal humans, left her message and departed without anyone seeing so much as a shadow. For the first time in his 40-year military career, Admiral Korvac understood that he was facing something beyond his ability to fight. "Sir, what are your orders?" asked Captain Dalsu nervously. Korvac looked at the list of dead children burned into his conference table. Jinny Park, age 8, died playing in her garden. Taemin Park, age 5, died holding his toy shuttle. His hands were shaking as he reached for the communication console. "Prepare for immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel," he said quietly. "Sir?" "You heard me, Captain. Get our people off this planet now." But even as he gave the order, Admiral Korvac knew it was already too late. The ghost had found them. The nightmare had become real, and she was just getting started. Admiral Korvac stared at the burned message on his conference table for a long time. The names of dead children seemed to glow in the dim light. Jinny Park, age 8. Taemin Park, age 5. 47 innocent lives snuffed out by his order. Fear crept through his body like ice water. This woman had walked onto his flagship, his most secure vessel in the galaxy. She had passed through shields that could stop nuclear weapons. She had moved past guards trained to kill anything that breathed wrong, and she had done it all to deliver a message. The 72-hour deadline felt like a countdown to his own death. Every minute that passed brought him closer to whatever she would do when she stopped being subtle. But Admiral Korvac was still an Imperial officer. Fear would not make him surrender to a terrorist. If she wanted a war, he would give her one. "Prepare the planetary bombardment systems," he ordered. Full sterilization protocol. Captain Dalsu looked shocked. Sir, there are 50,000 human civilians in the detention camps. Then we eliminate 50,000 potential rebel supporters. If this ghost is hiding among the population, she dies with them. If she is somewhere else, she learns what happens to species that threaten the Empire. The order went out to the orbital weapons platforms at 14:30 Standard Time. Massive energy cannons began charging for a bombardment that would turn the planet's surface into molten glass. At 14:31, every orbital platform around Kepler's edge lost power. Not damaged. Not destroyed, simply shut down as if someone had thrown a switch. Warning lights went out. Computer screens went black. The massive weapons that could crack continents became floating metal sculptures. Status report, Admiral Korvac barked into his communication system. All platforms are dark. Sir, came the panicked reply from the fleet communications officer. No response to our signals. No emergency beacons. It's like they just disappeared. At 14:32, alarms screamed throughout Admiral Korvac's flagship. Hull breach warnings flashed red on every screen. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically. The ship's computer announced massive decompression on decks 7 through 12. Damage control teams raced to the affected areas in full environmental suits, expecting to find gaping holes torn in the ship's armor. Instead, they found empty corridors filled with normal atmosphere. No breaches, no damage. No explanation for why the sensors had detected catastrophic hull failure. The warnings continued for 17 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as they had begun. At 14:33, every speaker on every ship in the Imperial fleet crackled to life. The voice that emerged was calm and female, speaking perfect Altarian with a slight accent that made it sound almost friendly. You had your chance. What happened next would be remembered as the darkest day in Imperial naval history. The Thought destroyer Nightfall exploded first. One moment it was holding formation with the rest of the fleet. The next moment it became an expanding ball of superheated gas and twisted metal. Captain Young-Sik O watched from the bridge of his cruiser Dominion as debris from the Nightfall rained past his viewports. What happened? Did they hit a mine? Before anyone could answer, his ship's computer systems began turning against their operators. Navigation fired thrusters in random directions, sending the massive cruiser spinning like a child's toy. Life support pumped poison gas into the air circulation system. Weapon systems locked onto other Imperial vessels and began charging their guns. Evacuate the ship, Captain O shouted over the blaring alarms. All hands to escape pods now. His crew abandoned the Dominion in small emergency craft, watching helplessly as their cruiser tore itself apart. Automated systems fired on each other. The reactor went critical and shut down. Hull plates separated as structural supports retracted for no reason. Within minutes, one of the Empire's most advanced warships had become a drifting wreck. But the fleet's destruction was just a distraction. While Admiral Korvac's forces burned in orbit, Hyunwoo Kim walked unopposed through the corridors of his flagship. She moved like a ghost through areas that should have been impenetrable, past sensor grids that could detect a heartbeat from a kilometer away, through security checkpoints that required DNA verification every 10 steps. The surveillance cameras showed empty hallways, but Imperial soldiers collapsed unconscious in her wake. Blast doors sealed themselves, then opened again with no record of the override command. Security alerts triggered and canceled themselves within seconds. She found Admiral Korvac in his panic room. The chamber had been built to withstand direct nuclear attack. 3 feet of reinforced armor on all sides. Air recycling systems that could operate independently for months. Enough supplies to survive a year-long siege. The door required Admiral Korvac's personal biometric signature to open. Palm print, retinal scan, voice recognition, and genetic sample all at the same time. No one else in the galaxy could get inside. It opened for her like she owned the ship. Admiral Korvac was surrounded by his personal guard, 12 elite soldiers who had never known defeat. Men trained from childhood to kill anything that threatened their commander. They wore the best armor the Empire could produce. They carried weapons that could melt steel. They saw her coming and opened fire immediately. The small chamber filled with enough energy to vaporize a building. Plasma bolts that should have reduced any human to scattered atoms filled the air with brilliant light. When the firing stopped and the smoke cleared, she stood in the center of the room completely unharmed. The guards stared at their weapons in confusion. Somehow their guns had switched to training mode. Harmless light projections that caused no damage. Someone had reprogrammed military-grade weapons in the seconds between seeing the target and pulling the trigger. Hyun-woo Kim stood before them in simple civilian clothes. A woman of average height with black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked like a teacher or shopkeeper. Nothing about her appearance suggested she could walk through Imperial defenses like they were made of paper, but her eyes held something that made Admiral Korvac's blood freeze. The cold fire of someone who had lost everything and no longer cared about consequences. "Admiral Korvac," she said in a conversational tone, "you killed my niece and nephew." The Admiral found his voice caught in his throat. This was impossible. One human woman against the might of the Imperial fleet. Yet his ships were burning in space and she stood in his most secure room like she had been invited. "How are you doing this?" he whispered. Her smile held no warmth at all. "Admiral, you have been asking the wrong question for 15 years. The question is not how I am doing this. The question is why you never wondered what humans were doing on colony worlds so far from Earth." She reached into her jacket. The guards tensed but found their muscles would not obey their commands to fire. She withdrew a small device no larger than a coin and placed it on the table between them. The device hummed softly and projected a holographic display that made Admiral Korvac's heart skip. "Beats Project Ghost Protocol," she explained casually. 15 years in development before your empire arrived. We were trying to create the perfect soldier, someone who could infiltrate any installation, defeat any enemy, survive any environment. The hologram showed medical readouts that looked more like science fiction than reality. Technical specifications for modifications that pushed human biology beyond its natural limits. Video logs of test subjects undergoing procedures that should have been fatal. Neural interface technology that allows direct control of electronic systems. Bone and muscle enhancement for superhuman strength and speed. Genetic modifications that permit survival in hard vacuum. Optical camouflage that renders the user invisible to most sensors. Admiral Korvac stared at the impossible data. "Our scans would have detected these modifications." "Your scans look for what you know exists," she interrupted. "You never scanned for hybrid organic synthetic neural networks because you did not know they were possible. You never checked for quantum phase muscle fibers because you had never seen them before." The hologram shifted to show footage of dozens of human volunteers undergoing transformation, learning to use abilities that seemed magical, preparing for a war that came too soon. "When your empire conquered our colonies, most of the Ghost Protocol subjects died fighting your invasion. A few escaped. Fewer still survived the years that followed. I was the only one who learned to truly disappear." Admiral Korvac's voice came out as a croak. "You have been planning this for 15 years? "Planning?" "No," her laugh held no humor. "For 15 years I was content to hide. I built networks, helped refugees, struck at targets when opportunities arose. I was careful never to reveal what I truly was." She leaned closer and he saw absolute clarity in her eyes, the terrible focus of someone who had chosen their path and would not be turned aside. "But then you killed children who carried my sister's name. You murdered innocents to make a point about imperial power. You took away the only family I had left." Each word hit like a physical blow, so I decided that hiding was no longer enough. The holographic display changed to show tactical information, fleet positions, defensive installations, weaknesses in Imperial armor that took years to discover. Admiral Korvac sat in the darkness of his panic room, listening to the sound of his flagship tearing itself apart. Emergency lights flickered red across the walls. Alarms screamed warnings about reactor failures and hull breaches. His communication system crackled with desperate reports from ships across the fleet. "Sir, the Nightfall has been destroyed. Admiral, we are losing power on all systems. Mayday, Mayday, this is the cruiser Dominion. We are abandoning ship." Through it all, Admiral Korvac could only think about the woman who had stood in his most secure room like she owned it. Hyun-woo Kim, not dead, not human anymore, something else entirely. The holographic projector she had left behind still hummed on his table. The display showed technical data that made his mind reel. Project Ghost Protocol, files that should not exist, medical procedures that pushed the boundaries of what flesh and blood could survive. His guards stood frozen around the room, staring at weapons that had betrayed them. Elite soldiers trained from childhood to kill anything that breathed wrong. Now they looked like confused children who had lost their favorite toys. "Sir," Captain Dalsu's voice came through the communication system. "We need to evacuate." The ship is breaking apart. Admiral Korvac forced himself to focus. He was still an Imperial officer. Even if his fleet was dying around him, he had duties to perform. All ships retreat to safe distance, he ordered. Prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace. But even as he gave the commands, he knew the truth. They were not retreating. They were running. Running from one human woman who had turned their greatest weapons into scrap metal. The evacuation shuttles launched from his flagship just as the reactor containment finally failed. The explosion lit up the sky like a second sun, visible from the planet's surface. Admiral Korvac watched from his escape pod as the pride of the Imperial fleet became expanding clouds of debris. In 18 hours, she had destroyed a force that could have conquered entire star systems. The survivors gathered on the remaining ships, shaken and demoralized. These were veterans who had fought alien armadas without flinching. Now they jumped at shadows and spoke in whispers about the ghost who walked through walls. Admiral Korvac called an emergency meeting of his senior staff. The hologram projector from Hyunwoo Kim sat in the center of the conference table like an unexploded bomb. "Report," he said simply. Commander Jun Sik cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, we have lost 70% of our fleet capacity." The destroyer Nightfall was completely destroyed. The cruiser Dominion is a drifting hulk. 6 escort vessels suffered critical system failures and had to be abandoned. Casualties? Surprisingly low, sir. Most ships were evacuated before they became uninhabitable. It is almost like she wanted us to escape rather than die. Admiral Korvac nodded grimly. That matched what he had seen. Hyunwoo Kim could have killed them all easily. Instead, she had given them time to run. She was sending a message, not trying to commit genocide. What about the orbital platforms? "All offline, sir." No damage visible from external scans, but they are not responding to any signals. Whatever she did to them was surgical. Precise. Captain Young-sik spoke up from where he sat with his arm in a sling. "Sir, I have been thinking about what she showed you. This Project Ghost protocol. If it is real, it explains everything we have seen." "Explain." "The impossible deaths on the planet. Officers dying in sealed rooms with no signs of forced entry. She can control electronic systems directly with her mind. Doors, sensors, life support systems. All of it becomes a weapon in her hands." Admiral Korvac activated the holographic projector. The display showed technical specifications that hurt to look at. Neural interface technology that merged human brain tissue with quantum computers. Genetic modifications that allowed survival in environments that would kill normal people in seconds. According to this data, she can interface directly with any electronic system. Captain Young-sik continued. Our security becomes her security. Our weapons become her weapons. Our ships become her tools. Commander Yoon-suk, the fleet's chief medical officer, studied the biological readouts with fascination and horror. These modifications should not be possible. The human nervous system cannot handle this level of enhancement without complete neural breakdown. Unless they found a way to make it possible, Admiral Korvac said quietly. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. They had not been fighting a normal human insurgent. They had been fighting something that existed beyond the normal rules of biology and physics. "How many others like her are there?" someone asked. Admiral Korvac replayed his conversation with Hyunwoo Kim in his mind. She had said that most Ghost Protocol subjects died during the initial invasion. A few escaped. Fewer still survived the years that followed. But she had also said something else, something that made his blood run cold. She mentioned that she was the only one who learned to truly disappear. That implies the others are still out there, hidden, waiting. The thought hung in the air like poison gas. One Ghost Protocol subject had destroyed most of their fleet in a single day. What could a dozen do? What could 100 do? Captain Dalsu voiced what everyone was thinking. "Sir, we need to report this to Imperial Command. They need to know what we are facing." Admiral Korvac nodded slowly, but he also knew what would happen when he filed his report. The Imperial High Command would read about impossible technologies and superhuman abilities. They would see the casualty reports and fleet losses, and they would blame him for the defeat. The Empire did not accept excuses. They did not acknowledge superior enemies. In their view, Imperial forces were always the strongest, always the most advanced, always destined for victory. A single human woman destroying an entire battle fleet would be seen as incompetence, not as evidence of unknown technology. His career was over. His reputation was ruined. He would be lucky to avoid execution for losing so many ships. But there was something else troubling him. Something Hyunwoo Kim had said during their confrontation. She had mentioned visiting every Imperial commander who targeted human civilians. One by one, Admiral Korvac realized with growing horror that she was not finished. Destroying his fleet had just been the opening move in a larger game. She intended to hunt down every officer involved in attacks against non-combatants. How many were there? Hundreds? Thousands? The Empire had been conducting pacification operations against human settlements for 15 years. Orbital bombardments, mass executions, forced relocations, all standard procedures for dealing with resistant populations. Now someone was coming to collect payment for those crimes. "Sir," Commander Junsik said quietly. "What are your orders?" Admiral Korvac looked around the table at his remaining officers. Good soldiers who had served the Empire faithfully. They deserved to know what they were facing. Prepare a full report for Imperial Command. Include all tactical data about the engagement. Include the technical specifications from the Ghost Protocol files. He paused. And include my recommendation that all operations against human civilian targets be suspended immediately. Sir, that recommendation will not be popular with the High Command. The High Command has not seen what we have seen. They have not watched their best ships turn into floating scrapyards. They have not looked into the eyes of someone who can walk through military-grade defenses like they do not exist. Admiral Korvac stood up from the conference table. Gentlemen, we are no longer fighting a colonial rebellion. We are fighting something that makes our greatest weapons useless, something that turns our own technology against us. He looked directly at each of his officers. I want you to understand this clearly. Hyunwoo Kim is not the disease. She is the symptom. For 15 years, we have been conducting operations that would make any civilized species declare war against us. Sir, those were necessary pacification measures. Were they? Were the children of Settlement Omega-7 really a threat to Imperial security? Were the families we relocated really dangerous rebels? The room grew uncomfortable. These were questions that Imperial officers were not supposed to ask. We created her, Admiral Korvac continued. We turned a hidden research subject into an active enemy by killing her family. We gave her a reason to stop hiding and start hunting. He walked to the viewports and stared out at the debris field that had once been his fleet. And now she is coming for everyone who made the same mistake I did. Commander Yunsuk cleared her throat. Sir, what do you think will happen when she reaches the Imperial capital? Admiral Korvac closed his eyes and tried not to imagine Hyunwoo Kim walking through the corridors of the palace on Nexus Prime. The Emperor's personal guards falling unconscious as she passed. Security systems opening doors, for her like loyal servants, the most powerful man in the galaxy waking up to find a simple breakfast beside his bed, and a message explaining exactly why his empire was about to learn a very painful lesson about consequences, I think, Admiral Korvac said quietly, that the Empire is about to discover what happens when you kill the wrong children. In the depths of space, emergency beacons from abandoned Imperial ships sent out automated distress calls, but no one was listening. Hyunwoo Kim had already moved on to her next target. The hunt had only just begun. News of Admiral Korvac's defeat spread through the Altarian Empire like wildfire. Official reports called it equipment failure and rebel sabotage. But word spread quickly through military channels about something else entirely. Something that hunted Imperial officers and turned their own weapons against them. The ghost stories that soldiers had whispered for 15 years suddenly became terrifyingly real, General. Hai Junko commanded the 7th Armored Division on the planet Meridian 5. He had overseen the pacification of 6 human settlements in the past 2 years. Clean operations, efficient, no survivors to cause trouble later. 3 weeks after the Kepler's Edge incident, General Ko woke up in his command bunker to find all the air vents sealed shut from the inside. Welded closed with military-grade plasma cutters that only his engineering team possessed. The bunker's life support system had been modified to recycle the same air over and over. Within hours, the oxygen levels began dropping dangerously low. Ko tried to call for help but found that his communication systems only played recordings of children laughing. His security team found him 3 days later, driven insane by isolation and the constant sound of young voices echoing through speakers that should not have been connected to anything. She was here, he whispered over and over. The children were here. They wanted to play. Commander Su Jin-yoon learned about Ko's breakdown while reviewing casualty reports in her private office. She commanded the orbital defense station above New Terra, responsible for the bombardment of 4 human colonies. When her aide brought the morning briefing, he found Commander Yoon sitting perfectly still at her desk. She was alive but would not respond to questions. Her eyes stared straight ahead at nothing. Every piece of furniture in her office had been moved during the night. Chairs, tables, filing cabinets, even her desk. All arranged in perfect formation to spell out words across the floor. The message was a list of names. Every civilian who had died under her command. Men, women, children, their ages written beside each name in small, precise letters. Commander Yoon never spoke again. She spent her remaining days endlessly arranging objects into patterns, trying to spell out apologies to people who could no longer hear them. Captain Dong Hyun Choi commanded the battlecruiser Retribution, patrolling the Outer Rim territories. His ship carried 3,000 crew members and enough firepower to level continents. It was one of the newest vessels in the Imperial fleet, equipped with technology that could detect hostile thoughts from orbit. They found the Retribution drifting in deep space 2 months after the Kepler's Edge battle. The ship was completely intact. All systems showed normal operation. Life support was functioning perfectly, but every single person on board had vanished. The investigation team went through the ship room by room. They found meals half-eaten in the cafeteria, personal belongings scattered in quarters as if people had simply stood up and walked away in the middle of their daily routines. The ship's log showed normal operations right up until 300 hours on day 127. After that, nothing. No distress signals. No emergency recordings. No evidence of what had happened to 3,000 people. In Captain Choi's private cabin, they found a message written on the mirror in what looked like condensed breath. They have gone to join the children of Settlement Omega-7. But Hyun-woo Kim's campaign was not just about revenge. She was systematically destroying the Empire's ability to wage war against human populations. Supply convoys carrying bombardment weapons disappeared between star systems. Military databases suffered mysterious corruption that made it impossible to distinguish between rebel targets and innocent civilians. Communication networks failed at crucial moments, leaving Imperial fleets unable to coordinate attacks. The Empire's response grew increasingly desperate. They pulled entire battle groups back from expansion operations to hunt for one human woman. They developed new scanning technologies designed specifically to detect Ghost Protocol modifications. They offered rewards that could buy entire star systems for any information about her location. Nothing worked. Hyun-woo Kim had become something beyond their understanding. She existed in the gaps between their sensors, moved through the spaces in their logic, struck from directions they could not perceive or predict. The breaking point came when she reached the Imperial capital itself. Emperor Valdris III ruled the Altarian Empire from his throne world of Nexus Prime. His palace sat in the center of the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy. Orbital fortresses that could shatter moons hung in the sky like metal stars. Ground defenses that had never been breached surrounded his home. The palace itself was a fortress within a fortress. Guards chosen from the best soldiers in the Empire watched every corridor. Technology that could detect hostile intentions from kilometers away monitored every approach. She walked through it all like morning mist. Through a screen door, Emperor Valdris woke one morning to find a simple breakfast waiting beside his bed. Rice prepared in the traditional style of Earth Colony 7. Vegetables grown in the type of garden that human families once tended before orbital fire turned them to ash. Tea brewed exactly the way his intelligence files said the Park family had preferred it. Beside the meal sat a small holographic projector displaying images that made his heart skip beats. Janae Park, age 8, playing in her family's garden just days before the bombardment. Taemin Park, age 5, learning to make his toy shuttle fly around their living room. A handwritten note lay beneath the projector. The penmanship was neat and careful, like a teacher writing on a classroom board. Your Majesty, it began in perfect Imperial script. You have built an empire on the belief that might makes right. That superior technology gives you the authority to decide who lives and dies. You have taught your people that humans are weak and unworthy of consideration. Emperor Valdris read the words with hands that trembled despite his efforts to stay calm. I am here to teach you a different lesson. I could have killed you in your sleep. I could have poisoned your breakfast or turned your palace defenses against your own guards. I could have made you disappear like the crew of Captain Choi's battlecruiser. The Emperor looked at his breakfast and realized he was afraid to eat food in his own bedroom. Instead, I chose to let you wake up and understand what I truly am. Not a terrorist or rebel, not a ghost story told to frighten soldiers. I am the consequence of your choices. I am what you created when you decided that human lives had no value. The note continued with demands that made Emperor Valdris's blood run cold. Immediate cessation of all military operations against human civilian populations. Withdrawal of imperial forces from human settlements. Reparations to families of those killed in unprovoked attacks. You have 72 hours to begin implementing these orders. If you refuse, I will demonstrate why the darkness should fear you, instead of the other way around. At the bottom, signed in flowing script, Commander Hyunwoo Kim, Human Colonial Defense Force. Ghost Protocol Subject 1. The last person you want to disappoint. Emperor Valdris read the note 3 times before his hands stopped shaking enough to set it down. When he looked up, his personal guards were waiting for orders. Their faces were pale with the realization that their most secure location had been compromised by someone who left no trace except courtesy and a perfectly prepared meal. The Emperor had ruled for 47 years. He had conquered civilizations and crushed rebellions across the galaxy. But he had never faced an enemy who could walk through his defenses like they were made of paper. More importantly, he had never faced an enemy who chose mercy over murder. That afternoon, Emperor Valdris issued a decree that shocked the entire empire, transmitted across all communication networks to every imperial base and ship. By imperial order, all military operations against designated human civilian targets are hereby suspended pending review of colonial policies. It was not surrender. It was not admission of wrongdoing, but it was fear. And for Hyunwoo Kim, fear was enough to begin with. The Emperor's decree created chaos in the imperial military structure. Commanders who had spent years conducting pacification operations suddenly found their orders canceled. Officers who had built careers on orbital bombardments were told to stand down. Some obeyed immediately, too frightened by the stories to risk attracting her attention. Others tried to continue their operations in secret, hoping to avoid notice. They learned quickly that Hyunwoo Kim noticed everything. General Minho Park tried to conduct an unauthorized strike against a human refugee camp on the planet Titan 7. His entire command staff was found unconscious in their briefing room the next morning. When they woke up, they discovered that someone had reprogrammed their targeting computers to fire on empty space instead of the settlement. Colonel Tae-sik Lee attempted to relocate human families from their homes to labor camps. The transport ships arrived at their destination to find that every single prisoner had been replaced by training mannequins. The real families had vanished during the journey, leaving behind only a message: these people are under protection. Word spread through the military that she was watching. Always watching.
Any officer who targeted human civilians might wake up to find their career ended or their sanity destroyed.